All right, I think we'll start. Welcome, everyone. I am Ken Spiro. I am the president and founder of School Sims, and I'm delighted on behalf of the School Sims team to welcome you to this webinar today. Quite excited about this topic. This is one of those that we have sadly seen too many instances of challenges to security, and that the thing that we find most compelling from our perspective, if we take away the tragedy or hopefully the not terrible things that happen, but how many times we find ourselves saying, if only we could have connected the dots, right? We saw the signs, there pieces were laid out there, the crumbs were there, but we didn't necessarily put it together. And that's something where that's judgment, right? That is a judgment challenge. And so the question is, how do we focus on judgment? Could you go to the next slide, Danielle? Now, for those of you who know back one slide, please. For those, I was at a conference yesterday. I was presenting at the Arizona School Administrator Association, and there were two keynotes that I found particularly compelling that also just were so great for my presentation. Dr. Martha Burns, who I believe is a professor at Northwestern and also in Carnegie Learning, and she's doing a lot of research in neuroscience and what goes on in the brain. And she'd really talk more about students, but obviously this is an adult issue as well. And the fact is the human brain is an experience-dependent organ, right? And the brain gets better at what it does. We know this from infancy, right? We learn how to walk, we learn through experience as we grow up. And that continues to be the case. And Jason Schechterle, I don't know if you've heard of him, but he was a police officer. You may have heard a story. In 2018, he was at a light and he was rammed from behind by a taxi cab and his car burst into flames. And by the grace of God, he actually survived. 43% of his body was burned. He had even fourth degree burns, which we didn't even know there was such a thing as a fourth degree burn, but that's really bad. And he's up and about and he's going around the country and sharing his story. And obviously we're not dealing with that kind of trauma or experience, as it was quite an inspirational talk. And his book is called Burning Shield, if you're interested. But what he talks about is the idea that life is 10% what happens and 90% how you react to it, right? So how do we get better at how we react, right? Again, this is experience. This is what we need to be able to do. So how do we do that in a way that's safe? Next slide, Danielle. We know that simulations from other fields approximate experience, right? You wouldn't put a pilot in a plane without hours of simulation. You wouldn't put a doctor or a nurse or a healthcare practitioner into a patient suite without hours of simulation. The same goes for education, right? This is another high stakes industry. It's another place in which we need practice because everything we face is new, right? Each time we face it, it's going to be different because people are acting different. Even if we're dealing day to day with the same people, they don't act the same way, let alone the fact that we're going to have to interact with new people, different situations, different combinations of things that come up. The only way to get better at doing that is to improve our ability to react, to judge, to exercise judgment in our reaction, not to react emotionally, but to be thoughtful and to exercise good judgment. And that only comes through practice. Next slide. So what we do, obviously, many of you know that, or for those of you who this is your first time, simulations, what we do are simulations around schools, whether it's school leadership, whether it's around at the superintendent level, the principal level, teacher sims or counseling sims, positions in which you're dealing with contextual issues that require judgment, right? There's plenty of things that you can just follow a recipe to follow. We don't simulate those. What we simulate are the things that require you to be able to be aware of what's going on around you, be situationally aware of your context, the who, what, where, with whom you're interacting, and then to practice making decisions. And it's not about getting it right, because experience is actually not about getting it right. Experience is actually often best learning comes from getting it wrong, from failing. And that's really what the opportunity with simulation is. Next slide, Danielle, please. And our version of simulation is browser-based, so they can be done synchronously or asynchronously, because as we had those quotes from Martha Burns, the brain is constantly learning. The more experiences we can have, the better off we are. So we want to be able to meet students where they are. Whether if it's in a group, we can do that synchronously. If there's no time for that, or it's an asynchronous program, by all means, send it out to them asynchronously so that experience can be had. And then what you do with it, right? We have to practice in terms of how we manage with the situations we face. That's obviously done in concert with the debrief, with instructional content, et cetera. So they can be blended in a variety of ways. The next slide. And this is our library. So we'll come back to this, but just, we've obviously captured problems of practice ranging across a wide breadth of different kinds of issues that manifest in a school setting, so that we can provide both authenticity and recognizability to these kinds of problems so people can get practice doing them. So coming back to the issue of security and the timeliness of, there's been too many situations that are out there that warrant having something like this. We had the wonderful opportunity, one of the things, the next slide, Danielle. We had the wonderful opportunity to connect with John Summers from University of Indianapolis a number of years ago. And I'll let him tell the story more, but it's been a delightful partnership in which we have developed a series of simulations with him and his team on counseling and related areas. And one of them was on security. And I'm delighted to be able to introduce him, and he will be able to introduce the rest of the team to talk a little bit about this idea of planning and leading security, and then to engage in some practice on the topic. John?
Thanks, Ken. Welcome, everybody. It's nice to see that we have a nice mixture of K-12 folks and higher ed professors, ed leadership. I'm John Summers. I'm the director of our graduate programs here at the School of Education at the University of Indianapolis. And we have a great team with us. And as we're going to do introductions a little differently, but we're going to start with a couple of questions to engage you, and then Krista, Lynn, and Christy will introduce themselves and make a comment about school safety. So hopefully we can provide information and insight from a higher ed perspective with Lynn and me, and then also Krista and Christy can provide a perspective from the K-12 environment. So next slide, Danielle, please. And let's go all the way. Yeah, let's go there, and then we'll come back in just a little bit. We must give a shout out to Lilly Endowment. So Lynn and I received 2 grants from Lilly Endowment. And what they were trying to do is to help K-12 schools enhance their school counseling initiatives, because we knew the ratios were too high. And then they also gave grants to higher ed institutions to study school counseling and to implement the content. And in this case, we implemented SIMS and case studies in our ed leadership program, so that our aspiring principals could know more about school counseling and how to integrate school counseling into their leadership team and into their school programs. As a part of that grant, just leave it there for 1 second, Danielle, if you go back. Yeah, I was just going to say, as the grant had particular outcomes, and during the grant, we've written more simulations than 5 at this point. But we committed to writing 5 simulations, and we did research with school districts about those simulations. And then we also did research with 5 school districts and their school counseling programs. And we took that content and we created case studies and simulations and other types of content that we've integrated into our ed leadership program. And as Ken was saying, school safety is it's a broad spectrum of issues. You're going to get introduced to one of those in the sim today and how you make decisions about that. And we know that school safety can range from the physical to the emotional to the psychological to cybersecurity, and just covers a very broad range of challenges. It's interesting on a lit review that we've done about school safety. There's a great need for more empirical studies. Of course, it's very hard to do experimental studies with schools. But at this point, what the literature is saying is that we do not know empirically what measures of school safety are most effective, which is an interesting hypothesis. Next slide, Danielle. So we're going to launch the webinar with a couple of questions, get people engaged and get our brains thinking and so forth. So if in the chat, and once we do the chat, then we'll come back and we'll add, if people would like to report out, that'd be great. And we're going to try to keep this somewhat compressed because we want you to play the simulation. But just think about this. In your district, school, or campus, what do you believe is the most critical aspect of ensuring school safety? So just a brief comment in the chat would be wonderful, and we will take a look at those. And then when we come back, we have one more question for you. So thank you for doing that. And we'll just take like a minute or so to do that. Let's see, practice, preparation, train staff, policies, protocols, procedures. Proactive engagement, preparation and communication, practice and procedures, leadership, yes. Realistic training and consistency. Nice. Maybe a couple more. Knowing your students. Excellent. Time for training and cross-training. Getting everybody involved. Implementing proactive programming to present crises. Having a threat assessment. We'll talk about that today. Relationships. Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you for doing that. And then clarity of staff roles. Whose job is it to do what in times of emergency? We were talking about that yesterday at a teacher or at a meeting that I was doing with a group of new teachers. So that's fantastic. Thank you. Critical information. Yes. So just very quickly, Christy or Krista, or before we do introductions, any comments about those real quickly?
They're all very important, and I appreciate that, because those are things that we are also working on at our school, in our school district as well.
Great. So let's go to the next slide. Then we'll have a little more content. And so this one is, the question is, if you just put your responses in the chat, and then we can talk about them in a little bit. What is a critical aspect of school safety that needs more attention and discussion? If you put those in the chat, that would be great. So what's something we're not addressing that we need to address? Mental health, both staff and students. Provisions for students, yes. Mental health, very important. I think that's on the top of all of our minds these days. What we say and what we're doing, that's an interesting comment. We have a comment from a national expert that we worked with about that. How do we do protocols? Unintended consequences of active shooter response drills and target hardening. That is a very huge part of the literature base, that if you go look at it, what is the impact of target hardening? Vulnerability assessment, threat assessment teams. Excellent. Okay, thank you so much. We will discuss and address probably most of those in the simulation, so we appreciate that. But if we could go to the next slide, what we're going to do now with introductions is Christy and Krista and Lynn are each going to introduce themselves. And then they're just going to make a comment about school safety and maybe something they're working on, a thought that they've had. And we know that Christy and Krista from a large district near us, they're working on every year we have to look at our school safety plans. And I know they've been doing a lot of work on that. So Christy, would you like to start, please?
Sure. I'm Christy Berger. I'm the Director of School Counseling and Mental Health for Center Grove Schools, which means I oversee and support our 28 school counselors and social workers that support our students. And part of my work is to do some of that proactive supports in addition to professional development around mental health. Think about how we respond after a crisis. So not always just thinking about in the moment, but what are we doing after to kind of debrief and make sure we're healing from said situations. And so really for school safety, I think one of the biggest things, and Krista will share a little bit about her role, is just how we've worked really closely to make sure our counselors and our administrators collaborate every day, obviously in the works that they do. And so really just making sure that our mental health experts are being brought into that topic of conversation when we're doing threat assessments, and making sure that that is looked at, and making sure that we're connecting with resources before, like after any type of assessment has been completed on a student we're concerned about.
Hi, and I'm Krista Nelson, the Director of Human Resources and Student Services for Center Grove Schools here in Greenwood, Indiana. I work with adults and with students. A lot of it is the relationship building and making sure that everybody feels respected and valued when they walk into our schools every day. We've got Dr. Bill Long, who is on here, is our Assistant Superintendent of Operations, and he is a big part. He is our leader when it comes to safety within our school corporation. And I know this is his #1 priority when it comes to making sure, again, that students and staff are safe within our schools and within our community as well. And so he's done a lot of work when it comes to school safety. This year as a team, we have really focused on threat assessments and making sure that we have the right people at the table when it comes to looking at students who may have made a threat within our school or within the community, and to make sure that we have a team that's supporting not only the student, but the family as well. And so that is something that we're continuing to work on as a district, just to make sure that we have the right people and the right team members for each student.
Great, thank you. Lynn?
Hi, I'm Lynn Wheeler, currently adjunct faculty at the University of Indianapolis, formerly an assistant professor there, and worked about 35 years in K-12 schools. My last assignment was at Ben Davis High School, a large urban school around Indianapolis. I'm going to focus a little bit today on SROs, school resource officers. When we do the case study, the school in the case study has a crisis response team that includes 4 people: the principal, the assistant principal, a counselor, and a school resource officer. And Ed Week tells us that last year, 42% of schools in the US had a school resource officer. And increasingly, these are law enforcement professionals or deputized professionals who are in the school full time. But there are some questions that have arisen about how school resource officers work and don't work. And that's something we'll focus on a little bit together. And also the idea of how school leadership and counselors can help SROs become a part of the team and be through regular dialoguing and projects together, help the SROs join the village, so to speak, at the school.
Great, thanks, Lynn, Krista, and Christy. Next slide, Danielle, please. So as Lynn said, we're going to jump into the simulation now, and the way that these are often played is that you'll reach a decision point, then we'll have you go into a breakout room and discuss very quickly, just a couple minutes worth, of what choice you will make, and then put your choice in the chat, or actually Nick will do a poll for us, and you'll choose which choice you think is the one, and then we'll come back and discuss it, and we'll, not all of us, but Christy, Krista, and Lynn and I will we'll make some comment about that. So this is it. This is the synopsis. In the face of a potential threat to students, you will work with others to respond decisively while balancing conflicting considerations. How you measure the situation and choose to act will bear different consequences. In the process of this simulation, aspects of your leadership style may be revealed. As Lynn said, we have a nervous 7th grader, Derek, an assistant principal, an SRO, and a school counselor. So Danielle, I think we're ready. As Danielle's doing that, as in real life, whenever you play the sim, and many of you have, but if you haven't, there's no way to go back in time. So there's no back arrow you can do during the simulation. You have to keep moving
In
forward.
this simulation, you will face challenges to the safety of your students and need to act decisively in response to a potential threat. You will need to choose a response that balances safety versus routine, transparency versus privacy, security versus ease of access, and maintaining a building versus community focus. Click on the next button to the bottom right to begin. In this simulation, we've created a dashboard in the upper right corner of the screen to show how your decisions impact the satisfaction of your staff, students, parents, and community. These are the important stakeholders that each of your decisions will influence. Mouse over each row of dots to see its name. The colors will change from time to time based on your choices. Green suggests you are managing them well, yellow means not so well, and red, well. Evergreen Middle School was built in the mid-70s in a medium-sized community of about 200,000. The school has not had security issues in the past. The building has had a number of upgrades and improvements over the past 5 years, many aimed at making the school more secure. With school security incidents back on front pages, your district has initiated an audit of emergency response plans, or ERPs. Your plan was written 2 years ago and has been updated once. However, your crisis response team, or CRT, has not been trained since the plan was written. You, the school principal, the assistant principal, and the school resource officer comprise the CRT. You are a school counselor at Evergreen and have been for the past 2 years. With 520 students, 192 of them in 8th grade, you often feel overwhelmed. Much of your work seems to focus on administrative tasks that have become part of your duties. But you have been working with the principal and other administrators to eliminate some of those tasks and thus allow more of your time and energy to be focused on supporting mental health efforts within the school and district. You have a good working relationship with the principal and the SRO, as well as the other counselors in the school district. A school shooting occurred several months ago in your state, which brought the topic of safety to the forefront again. Your district has taken steps to ramp up prevention and preparedness. For details of these preparations, a document has just been added to your file cabinet. As you prepare for a very busy Monday, Derek, a 7th grader, timidly knocks on your door. You invite him to come in and have a seat. He comes in, but remains standing. You sense his discomfort and ask what's on his mind.
I didn't recognize the boy. I believe he's new. I think he might be an 8th grader. He told the kid sitting next to him on the bus that something bad might happen at school today. He was holding on to his black backpack and padding. I'm kind of scared.
You ask Derek for specifics, and he becomes very nervous and isn't able to give you much.
He was about as tall as me. He had on a hoodie, so I couldn't see his hair and much of his face. I just didn't recognize him, and I don't think he's been on the bus before. Is it okay if I go to my class now?
You are a member of the crisis response team, so as soon as Derek leaves your office, you reach for the emergency response procedure. Since its most recent revision, you've really not thoroughly reviewed it. Your school has a very basic emergency response procedure described by the mnemonic API, with communication and coordination between each step. 1. Analyze, assess threat. 2. Plan strategy and tactics. 3. Implement. 4. Evaluate. Developed to provide general guidelines applicable in almost all emergencies, this process provides a recommended algorithm with limited detail and guidance for each suggested step. A detailed version of this plan has just been placed in your file cabinet. Once opened, you may want to simply minimize the document for ease of future reference. You recognize a potential threat here, but are not at all certain of exactly what it is. You realize you have very little time and will need to respond quickly. To apply your school's model, you decide to begin by initiating a threat assessment. What will you do first to assess the threat?
So I will just review these very quickly. Choice 1, call Derek back to your office. And the I buttons are important because they give you just a little bit of insight of information. Choice 2 is confer with the principal. Choice 3 is gather the CRT, the crisis response team. The next one is identify the student. And the last one, choice 5, is to begin a room by room search. So are we going to pop into breakout rooms real quickly, Nick, to discuss these, or should we just go with a choice?
First, we'll let people kind of come up with what they're anonymously thinking about,
Okay.
and then
Okay.
they can go to the breakout room to talk about what they put into the poll.
Okay, great. Great. So maybe we could go to the breakout room, Nick, is that correct? Yep, and you have about 2 minutes. That would be great. But Melissa Stagger, what's your thinking?
I did the principal first, just because right away you could divide and conquer. They could quickly say, they could get the team while you could, go identify the student, get the bus list. The team is probably multiple people, whereas the principal can do that while you do whatever your next step is.
Okay, thank you so much. All right. But Suzanne Klein, what do you think? Or anybody else? Yep.
Hi there. Can anybody just jump in?
Yes,
Sure.
please.
Okay, great. I thought, and that one of the other people in our group thought that we would identify the student first. If I have access to that information, I would quickly find out who the student is and perhaps bring him in and talk to him before I have to involve the principal.
Excellent.
Might
Thank
be
you
able
so
to
much.
shut it down right away.
Okay, very good. All right. Anybody on our team would like to make a comment? Krista, Christy, or Lynn?
I can say in our space, I was with Melissa, we kind of talked through 3 different options. Initial feeling was to identify the student, but then we also had reach out to the principal and then get your crisis response team together. And the thought behind both of that was to kind of divide and conquer. So if you just keep the information with the counselor, as opposed to getting more adults who are trained in that, to really help to kind of narrow that down a bit quicker. So we talked about that in our space.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you so much for sharing. So Danielle, why don't we move on the simulation?
You've decided to gather the CRT, so you first call the principal and the secretary answers. Anita informs you that the principal is out of the building for the next 2 hours in meetings with district. She says that she will contact him, but not to expect him to be on site for at least 45 minutes. The CRT less the principal, gathers to your office. This takes about 10 minutes. You provide those present with a concise overview of the situation. Then, referring to the emergency response procedure that each possesses, you suggest that a threat assessment is needed.
I'm concerned that we're doing this without Principal Stout being present.
It would be optimal to have the entire team here, but we're up against the clock right now. Something can pop at any moment. I suggest we get started and bring Principal Stout up to speed when he arrives.
With each of you defending a different perspective, you're finding it difficult to agree on a threat level and thus next steps. You feel pressure building. A debate over the threat and possible options has gone on for the past 10 minutes. To this point, the discussions relative to determining the validity and size of the threat have not resulted in anything definitive. Your gut tells you some level of threat exists, whether to an individual or group. Which of the following might be most effective in identifying a threat level and determining an appropriate response?
So again, the choices very quickly, our first choice is plan on the worst, hope for the best. Choice 2 is ask the CRT to vote on the threat level. The third choice is call the district for guidance. Put the building in lockdown. The last, leverage the CRT to gather more information quickly. So let's go ahead and make a choice, and then we'll pop into a breakout room very quickly. Okay. Interesting to see the choices changing. So Nick, why don't we, great. We're going to join a breakout room very quickly. Thank you.
Yes. Hi. I chose option 5, which was leverage the CRT to gather more information. Like I explained to the group I was in, our school is pretty small and we have the ability to communicate rather quickly. And our CRT involves all of admin and other entities. So we're able to kind of make decisions rather quickly. So I'm going with option 5.
Great, thank you. Anybody else that did not pick option 5 might want to give us some insight?
I did the same thing again. I think what Ms. Williams was saying was like a spot on though. Like I would have to let district office know because you can't be doing all this and not have the board and everybody know. But at the same time, the CRT should be going out and getting more information.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Christy or Krista or Lynn, any thoughts? I think you're muted, Lynn. Yep.
Alfonso, could you talk about your explanation about choice 1, which I thought was interesting, and your responsibility in your school or district is school security, right?
Yes. I'm a security coordinator here in Dinuba, California. I had picked number 1, plan for the worst and hope for the best. I guess depending on like the SRO said in the little video there, is that time is of the essence, and we're against time on that. And first primary thing is to finding that kid and identifying who it is and searching his backpack. In lieu of the others, and gathering a team and calling the district and all that stuff could be done after the fact. But I think immediately we have to find that kid just in case he could be carrying out what he proceeded to do. And while we're trying to gather the team, and lockdown could be an option, but like Lynn mentioned, we can't go into lockdown every time a kid says something like that as well either. So we got to, first is finding the kid and locating him and searching the kid, making sure at that point, then we leverage the CRT team.
Great, thank you, Alfonso. That's great. As you see, there.
That's okay. That's what I find interesting because the first choice that we had in the first choices was to identify the child. So so then we're given all these other options, but it didn't really fit with my first choice. right? Which would be exactly what Alfonso said. Let's find this child and figure out what's going on here. We don't know. I mean, we have no idea. And it didn't sound like a really big threat to me. We didn't see a gun. We didn't see any evidence of anything that would be scary. Who knows why this child was upset or why he was nervous, but shouldn't that be then our first step is to identify this child?
Okay. Very good. Thank you.
I'm just curious as to what people say about that.
And also, I think a lot of also it depends on your role there at this district too, or at the school site. What's your role is if you're a teacher there, what do you do at that point? If you're security there, and like my role automatically go into, we conduct an SRO and find the student, and then everybody's gonna have a different take on it versus if you're a monitor out there where I'm gonna notify the principal first, or I'm gonna notify someone else first. I mean, it all depends on kind of your role at where you're at and who's reported to at that time.
I agree, but wasn't our role as a counselor?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't catch that part. I thought we were just identifying with the counselor and we're doing our particular role. Okay, so that changes.
The principal, conveniently, the principal is at a meeting and the school counselor had to head up the CRT and so forth. Well, let's great discussion. Thank you so much. But let's keep going here, Danielle, because it just gets better, right?
What would be your initial concerns and resulting primary focus for handling this situation? Type your responses in the space provided below.
So I think we've done that, but when you play this with students, and we've played it probably 3 times, it's very interesting to see what students, and when you get your report, you can see what students have written in here or what teachers have written in or whatever your level of professional learning is. So go ahead, Danielle, please.
You've decided to leverage the CRT to quickly gather as much information as possible. You asked the AP if he would be willing to talk with the bus driver, check bus rosters, and look at possible seating charts. You asked the SRO to review bus videos for any information they might provide.
Assessing and viewing bus videos will be a time-consuming undertaking and may or may not, in the limited time available, be able to leverage them for information. I suggest that we may need to move forward based on what others uncover. I will volunteer to speak with Derek again and see if I can't get some additional information from him.
The SRO returns about 20 minutes later and reports that she spoke with Derek and that the pressure he is feeling right now has shut him down as a resource. She was not able to get anything new from Derek. As the debate continues, a sense of foreboding increases. You reach a point where you need to decide whether or not to push the CRT toward a choice. Do you push the CRT to assign a threat level?
And this is a yes or no. We need to take action before something potentially happens, or no, the purpose of the CRT is to encourage varied perspectives and critical thinking. So the one document we have not seen, and it's kind of long, so that's why we didn't look at it, but there are different levels of threat, and that's in our file cabinet. And the top level or the top level is take action right now, lock the school down, start looking in lockers if its lockers are there and so forth. So we just have to decide right now, do you push the CRT to assign a threat level? So what level of threat is it? And it's a kind of difficult to identify because we haven't seen the sheet in terms of the threat levels. So maybe we can just, we could look at that real quickly, maybe. So the levels, this is a document that we created with our national expert. So is it critical, restrict entry and exit, or is it, so critical is, we really have to take serious action. Urgent, consult with law enforcement, restrict exit and entry, inform teachers, so get the word out, something is awry here. Is it important? Consult with law enforcement, restrict entry and exit, or does it need attention? So do we need to keep gathering information? So that's kind of those are the different threat levels that the CRT is asked to decide.
As the debate continues,
So just very quickly, just choose a yes or no, and then we won't go into breakout rooms. We'll just start. We'll just continue. And do you have a poll, Nick, for this one, or should we just? So let's just do, what do people think? Tom, Ralston, what do you think?
Well, honestly, I feel like we have a very kind of nebulous situation here that the student really hasn't given anything definitive. So I really believe like that you really need to know more about is this a potential threat? There needs to be an assessment made and a determination of the threat level. But if the student would have given more specific information about, it's a feeling basically from the student, and the other student may have been saying something about he felt something, maybe something was going to happen bad to him, right? Like there's just too much open space there. I think you need to know more.
Okay.
So I would go with probably the second choice.
Okay, thanks for that input. So let's charge ahead here, Danielle, and go to the next scenario.
the
Thank you.
CRT suggests dividing and gathering as much information as possible in 30 minutes. They agreed to have Anita talk to the bus driver. The AP will check bus rosters and seating charts, and you will check bus videos. With a couple of minutes to spare, the CRT reconvenes in your office and reviews their findings. The school secretary and AP report that in their conversation with the bus driver, he remembered a boy he didn't recognize getting on the bus at one of the last stops. The emergency response protocols at your school are based first on a threat assessment or designation of risk level. Based on the information collected to this point, which protocol branch will you recommend to determine next steps?
So that was that document we looked at. So do we think it's a critical? It requires immediate and definitive action. Remember, we were going to do exit and entry lockdown. Urgent, limited time to analyze and plan. Important, there's sufficient time to think about it. And then the situation needs attention. Let's go and pick one of those. Okay, great. All right. So let's just say we'll just do just a couple more, but choice 2 is 47%. So urgent. So it's an urgent situation, we believe. And then the next choice was choice 3, important. Okay. And 24% decided it was critical. Okay, very good. Thank you. Let's go ahead and do a couple more here real quickly. I think we have time, Danielle.
Half an hour later, the CRT reconvenes in the principal's office. Analyzing the information collected, 3 boys are identified as possible matches to the description provided by Derek. What will you do next?
So this is one of my favorite choice points in this simulation. So what will we do next? Will we get Derek to confirm the identity? So you bring Derek to the office, show him some pictures, call each boys' teachers and arrange to have the 3 boys brought to the principal's office, have them bring their backpacks, collect the 3 boys during the next scheduled rotation class change, and lastly, personally visit each class and collect the boys. So let's go ahead and do this one because this is, I think, an inflection point. So choice 4 is very popular, 80% is visit the classes. Okay. All right, go ahead and make a choice. Choice 4 is still leading here. Okay, so let's just do some quick talk out. And help us think about what you're thinking. And any of the team can talk. I mean, you know, anybody. Dr. Long, maybe you'd like to make a comment.
You know, finding the unmute button is probably the hardest part of the exercise so far. No, I think at that point you need to personally visit the class. You've narrowed it down to 3 people. You don't want to give them the opportunity to leave that classroom and go through a passing period or have the ability to do something after you call the kids down to the office. So at this point, you probably need to go maybe along with an SRO to collect the kids.
Excellent, thank you. Anybody else? Krista or Christy or Lynn or?
Well, I don't understand why why can't we just go and collect the boys? Like, why is the an option to bring the boys and then or to go and visit the classroom? That should be one option, right? You're gonna go and get the boys that you had, you have to go to the classroom and collect them. I mean, who is gonna send boys by themselves to the principal's office, to whatever it is? Because you need to find that person. I don't care if this was a scare or not, and now you have 2 people confirming that, yeah, there is somebody who went on the bus who hadn't been on the bus before. You just need to make sure nothing is happening instead of just figuring out maybe something might happen.
Right, so getting access to the boys is very important, right?
Yeah, I also would agree with that as well. Just due to the fact the initial comment made was something bad's going to happen. That was the initial comment that was made by that the young man overheard. So that's why I would treat the whole situation with urgency, even though we don't have a lot of information. But definitely we will go to the classroom and pick the kid up. And like Dr. Long said, along with the SRO, and that's probably the first person I would notify would have been the SRO. And once we identify who the kids are, we're picking them up. And not allowing them to go anywhere else, and just to make sure to rule them out on what they have.
Great, thank you so much. Well, we're kind of getting obviously it takes a while to play the simulation, but this is a very good representation of how the simulation at least has, when Lynn and I do them with our aspiring principals, how it plays out with lots of discussion and lots of debrief. But we're going to have to, I think, put a bookmark in it here, Ken, right? And people are welcome to stick around after the hour, but we want to honor your time.
Did you want to switch back to the slides?
Yeah, I could do that real quickly. Yep. All right. And wherever, what's the one above that, Danielle? Oh, go down. Yeah. Yeah, there we go. So I think there we go. Yeah. So I think we certainly talked about this, you know, what's the credibility of the threat? That's the first thing we have to think about. And then given that answer, how do we best ensure school safety? These are not easy decision points. This article, Rappaport, who's a psychiatrist, one of the things she says in her article, we have to decide, is this a substantive threat, if we can do that, one that is urgent, or is it a transient threat, something that will, you know, play itself out without any negative harm and so forth. And then she just says these are critical triage decisions that every school leader must make when they're put into this situation. Oh, may we have the emergency threat level chart? Yeah, go ahead, please.
I don't have access to that, but someone could get it. It's from the file and send it to you, Melissa, in the next few minutes, I would guess.
Yeah, and the next slide, Danielle. This is just very quickly, and we don't have time to talk about these, but these are some of the takeaways from the lit review. There's great discussion. Philosophical discussion is fascinating. That target hardening, anywhere from, you know, cameras to biometric surveillance, that it may detract from the mission of schools. 87% of SROs carry firearms. There's great discussion in the literature about that. Is that good or bad? Also, some of the studies, and they're more correlational, obviously, show that intense hardening increases absenteeism and negative academic performance because students start focusing on the surveillance and metal detectors and things like that, and it takes their mind away from teaching and learning. Cameras, some of the literature shows that cameras in schools do create a positive response, particularly on pro-social behavior, because I guess people think you're being watched. There's also another discussion that's really interesting about cost efficiency, and some authors are contending that because we can identify the cost of metal detectors, we can identify the cost of surveillance, we can identify the cost of bulletproof glass, that we're adopting those just because we can't, in terms of a difference, we can't put a cost on, outreach to the school community, hiring more school counselors, doing more mental health centers in our schools, and so forth. So this is one way we can use our resources knowing what the cost is. And the last one is very apparent in the research, or in the literature, is that low-income minority majority schools are the most hardened in the nation. Go ahead, Danielle. I think that's it. Oh, these were just 3 quotes. I thought they were interesting. There is no programmatic approach to ethical school safety. It's a very difficult situation to think about in ethics. The second question is kind of the one that we all need to answer. What degree of risk is acceptable to schools which aim to protect students' lives and bodies and also develop their minds and hearts? How do we balance that? And then the last one is from a school principal: it's better to overreact than underreact. Like in this situation, what is the nature of the threat and how should we respond to it? And it seems like most of us will go to the overreact than underreact, just to protect and save lives in case something, bad is going to happen. And that's it. Ken,
Thank you for that.
Welcome to take over. Yeah.
Thank you for that, John and team. Obviously, as you can tell, it has been a great partnership working with John and Lynn and their partners in terms of designing these and trying to capture, in a confined experience, if you will, the opportunity to engage with this. And if it wasn't clear, this is a choose your own adventure. So when you make a choice, it takes you down that path. So if the choice that you had made wasn't chosen, then obviously we're seeing different consequences, but obviously we can go back and play it again to see what would have happened if we would have had selected differently. One of the new things that we're doing actually in terms of, as additional research is coming out, and certainly the situation that we find ourselves in, is to incorporate a pause into that decision-making where, certainly for less experienced folks, where you might be feeling a little tense. And the emotions, the stress that we might be feeling, is it critical? Is it important? Is it urgent? Do we take that ethical challenge, and do we overreact? Do we underreact? But to actually take a breath for a moment, because just reacting is probably not going to lead us to a good path. And so the opportunity to recognize our emotions and to allow for students, to allow for developing folks to actually acknowledge and validate that, yes, this is tough. And before making that reaction, acknowledge that and then move on so that we can actually exercise judgment in a more, well, at least as thoughtful as we can be. But the opportunity to engage in this way so that we have experiences that we can then utilize for learning, that we can reflect upon what we're going through and then think about what came out of that experience, because that's what's retrievable when we ultimately face these, God forbid, in our situations. And so the opportunity to do this in a way where, whether it's asynchronous and people are doing it and processing it and submitting their responses, or whether it's synchronously where you're doing it with peers, with colleagues, so it also isolates folks. Obviously, these are the kinds of things that we look to get at with this modality in order to both, on the one hand, develop skills, on the another hand, to develop the team and alignment behind the process, the methodology. There was that situation in Virginia where the teacher got shot by a student, and she's suing the school because she perceived there was no process. I don't know the details of that, but how do we get alignment? How do we get everyone in the building aligned to a process, a procedure, a way to act in terms of, and how do we do that in a way that is compelling and not invasive or confrontational, if you will. So anyway, with that, thank you all for your participation. We are all willing to stay on. If you would like to stay on and either continue in the sim, or if you have questions, we'd love to answer them. But in the meantime, if you do would like to take advantage of we're offering a discount if you engage with us as a result of this simulation, or at least be in touch. So you can use that QR code. And this is our last webinar of the year, although we may be doing some over the summer, so watch for announcements. And we will definitely be looking forward to doing a new round of them in the coming year, where again, it's important to be able to combine, this is a true form of blended learning, right? Where you're getting the content around the issues of security, the issues of whatever it is, and then you combine that with the experience and be able to have the opportunity to apply what you've learned from the content, or to discover what you don't know so that it motivates you to go after the content. This is the kind of thing that we're looking to do in a variety of problems of practice that are facing our leaders and our teachers and counselors in schools. So with that, I will thank you for your attendance, and I would very much like to thank our panelists for participating in this and for leading our discussions. But would love to, if you have questions, please feel free to unmute and ask away. Oh, and have a great summer, those of you who are wrapping up your school years. Hopefully your school years are ending well, successfully, and wishing you a great summer.
I think there's a great comment in the chat here, Ken, that I would love to have Krista and Christy and maybe Bill respond to, and Lynn. And you want to say it out loud, or you want me to read it? I'm looking at the author here.
Me?
Yeah, you.
Want me to say it out loud?
Yeah, sure, sure. Go for it.
Yeah. I wasn't sure, did I miss something, but since we're looking at steps that should be taken and policies and procedures and whatnot, I was more concerned with the ineffectiveness of the counselor right from the get-go, and that the counselor maybe should have some kind of protocol or procedure that they need to follow, because there's many of those steps that were going to be taken later that the counselor could have condensed some of those things and discovered some things very quickly. What bus route are you on? What time does your bus arrive? Would you be able to identify the student if you saw him? I wouldn't put you in that position so that you would have to do that in front of him, but I'm just wondering, would you, if you saw him, would you be able to identify him? Just those kinds of things, right? Because the student shut down initially, and then we're going to go back and interview the student. Let's just get as much information as possible right from the get-go in a safe environment so that the student doesn't feel threatened, right? That would be sort of and I don't know if I'm being a jerk with that, but it just seemed to me that the counselor just didn't do the job that the counselor should have been doing.
Interesting.
Maybe that's something that could be built into the simulation.
I think it's a good observation. Christy, would you like to respond?
Sure, I can say that one of the things we've done this year is Krista, Dr. Long, and myself have come together to create our threat assessment, and it walks through those questions. And so our administrators should, in theory, be the ones that take the lead and have our counselors and social workers support them. But of course, there are times that they're out of the building. And so our counseling team is aware of those documents, how to pull those up, and those typical questions to ask to make sure they can get some of that done at that time, as opposed to having to prolong it and ask questions later.
Krista?
Yeah, I can just add on to that too. So within our threat assessment, we always ask for 2 people to fill it out, because sometimes when you're hearing something that there may be a threat at your school, it may pull into your personal heartstrings, and you may not think about the different questions that need to be asked. to identify that student or what the threat is. And so we always pull two people together, whether it be a counselor and a principal or a dean, or, maybe it's the one of the school safety team people and an admin, but they can tag team and think about, I may ask a question to Christy and Christy may be like, oh gosh, now we need to ask this question. And they may ask the next one. So some really good questions that we have tapped into is actually from the Secret Service. You can find it on their website. It's Secret Service with their school threat assessment protocol. And they have some really, tier 1 general questions all the way up to tier 3 when you're trying to dig deep into some threats that are happening within the school. So we tag team, we do 2.
I think your question relates to training and practicing, in that however we may feel about API and how this particular district has laid out their threat assessment process, the SIM makes it clear that they haven't practiced it. And so it became a document that was put away somewhere. And I think when we create ways to address these kinds of various serious needs, but we don't do some practicing and some debriefing, what you described is going to happen.
Yeah. I'd like to respond to Amanda. Amanda, your comment about did they use a particular formal threat assessment? The literature does show that the 2 you mentioned, sorry, I hit the microphone. It has been shown to be effective. And when you do follow a formalized threat assessment like that CS tag, I'm sure you say it probably differently in that, but that has shown good evidence in the field. I'd be interested, Krista and Bill and Christy, did you create your own threat assessment, or did you adopt a model that was in practice?
Actually, my question was in the context of the simulation, were they supposed to have a threat assessment based on one of those models? Because I unfortunately lost the webinar for part of it. So I don't know if I just missed that part, or if it was part of a formalized model that they were using in the simulation.
Yeah, so the API was one that was, I think this is right, Lynn, the one that the national expert we worked with suggested.
I don't recall. Amanda, were you the person who requested a copy of the API, the 4 areas of threat assessment, and also the district?
No, I wasn't, but I would be curious because I've never heard of API. So I would be really interested to hear about that, or if that's based on one of kind of the big 3 models, or where that fits in.
Yeah, I honestly don't recall, John, but those documents were in the file cabinet earlier in the.
We will share the artifacts, so we can do that. So, I mean, you'll get a copy of the recording and you'll be able to see what was shared. But we'll also send the artifacts based on the number of requests that came through. And I did also want to respond to Lucinda's, and actually, one of the things, the beauty of this modality is that, again, we're not trying to teach you the right way to do it, right? Because that is contextual, and there's not one way, and we're not going to be the ones to be out there promoting that one way or another. But the beauty of the modality is that it can provoke, and that's where discussion happens, and that's really the goal. And so within the confines of the modality of the narrative-based components, right, where there's engagement, right, and we try not to overload by design so that in your mind's eye you're seeing way more, right? But there's enough here to tie into what's going on in what you're seeing from your own experiences or your building, and now you're layering that on, and now that's going to get you to speak. Now that's your perspective, which somebody else can't see because they can't see what you see unless you tell them. And so to get that surface, to hear how you perceived what was going on in there, and then asking those questions, that just takes learning and expands it dramatically in ways that aren't predictable, right? Because you have a group of students. So anyway, that's the power of the modality. So thank you. Other questions?
Something I might add also is, I hope you all get an opportunity to play the sim in its entirety, because there are some other very critical factors that are a part of the sim, including communication strategies with parents. For example, sometimes we handle a threat situation effectively, but we fail on communication. And that's a whole other skill set as far as how schools address what you do after you find the weapon or establish there was no weapon, but how you let your school community know about it.
And we can make that for those of you who are still here, and maybe others will hear it on the recording. If you are interested in seeing the rest of the simulation, please let us know. And we can enable that for you so you can play it in its entirety. Any other questions? Well, then I guess we'll wrap up. Thank you all. For those of you who are still here, thank you for your participation. And we're very interested in your feedback and also to being in touch with you for future elements, and obviously to potentially collaborate with you and in your areas of work. But thank you again to the team who delivered. And we very much look forward to connecting with you again in the future.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
You have a request there,